Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am Courtney Anderson, and this is our 189th episode of this program. Amazing. So today, in episode 189, we have a show that is part of the Satisfaction Saturation series. And Satisfaction Saturation, in addition to having alliteration, is a series that's all about the other side of the question. What is holding you back from surpassing your goals? In other words, once you surpass your goals, then what? Well, that's why we have this series. We're not going to just leave people sort of out there hanging with no support and resources after you surpass your goals. Then what do you do? Because it brings with it a whole other set of problems or challenges, as we like to call them. And often we're so focused and obsessed on the sort of the journey to surpass the goal, to climb the mountain, we don't ever plan for what are we going to do afterwards? Now what? And it sounds potentially something that some people will say, well, I'm not going to worry about what happens after I'm, financially independent. I'm not going to worry about what happens after I, graduate from my school program. I'm not going to worry about after I achieve my professional goals. Well, my argument is then you're really gonna end up in some trouble if you don't think about this, because if you think it's just gonna be magic, then and bliss and sustained ecstasy, you're being unrealistic, because you're gonna have a whole nother set of questions. Now what? And we talk about that other set of questions in this series. That's what it's here for. One of my favorite hip hop songs. It was entitled, and it actually described in the lyrics. It's talking about more money, more problems, or it was abbreviated in slang, right? But more money, more problems, and the whole idea. This was by the late artist, Biggie Smalls, and the whole point was that hey, it isn't, the grass isn't always greener. When you get to these situations you didn't really think about, it's going to potentially bring. This is my interpretation, of course, of hip hop lyrics, but it's going to potentially bring challenges that you didn't even think about because they didn't exist before. And that's what I agree, and that's why we have this show. So what do you do after you surpass your goal? That's what we're talking about in this series. Specifically in the show. What's our topic? Well, you're in store for a treat. Today, our specific show topic is, have you already peaked? Is it downhill from here? Have you already peaked? Is it downhill from here? Uh-oh. So, again, the other side of surpassing your goal, the other side of succeeding is, was that it? Was that the highlight of my life? Have I already peaked? Is every moment from here on out just going to be downward slide into diminishing levels of accomplishment? Hey, one of the things that I personally have not experienced, but I think is a really good example of this question, has to do with people who are athletes. And you'll see it with somebody who's an athlete, partially because many athletic endeavors are such that the younger you are is sort of the time that you're going to achieve the highest level of success. So in really physically demanding sports, you'll tend to see that, right? And so you'll have people who, they're not kidding, they're not exaggerating at all, but they honestly have accomplished the highest possible goal they could have set in their sporting event. Maybe they won the Olympic gold medal. Maybe they won the world championship, and and they're 24 years old. What do you do now? Or what do you do when you've accomplished an incredibly successful thing? And you can see that even in asking the question, and like I said, it isn't anything I've ever personally experienced. I'm not an athlete of any other than just my own for fun, trying to move around and stay active. But I'm not anybody who ever did anything athletically of note. So I myself haven't won an Olympic medal, but we read about this all the time. It's like, oh, I remember so and so, they won the championship, or they were the number one in the world, or I watched them in that event, or I saw them in the Olympics. And most of the time, of course, they go on to have great lives and continue to do um, really positive and new adventures. But there's always those stories, which unfortunately sometimes are really popular, of the person who just, it was a disaster. And that really was, when you look back in hindsight, the best accomplishment of their life. And then they sometimes were self destructive and made really poor decisions. Um, and it's sad. My point is that that's why we have this show, Satisfaction Saturation, so we can think about and plan ahead. And then when it does, and when we're in that situation, realize it's not unusual. It's not us. It's not weird to ask, have I peaked? Especially if you've accomplished things that are objectively defined as, the best. So if you, again, I use the sporting example, but it could happen in any field. If you won the highest scientific award in your field, if you won, the Pulitzer Prize, if you won um, the Nobel Prize, if you, I don't care, whatever it is, it's the best. If you've already done that, then what? There's a classic Hollywood film, if you haven't seen Sunset Boulevard, I strongly recommend. And I haven't seen it recently, so this is from memory, but I love classic Hollywood films for a multitude of reasons. But they're some of the most interesting pieces of art I think you can avail yourself of, and most of them, because they're not new movies, are really easily accessible. Um, so in this movie, basically, it's a lot of things, but part of the story is that there's someone who was the most famous and acclaimed actress, um, but that was in the past, and now how does she reconcile today with what she perceived herself to be in the past, especially at the height of her experience. And there's lots of other films that covered some of this category incredibly well. But you, this is actually a show that it's actually it's painful in some ways because we can empathize, even if we haven't been an Olympic gold medalist or a world champion or the most famous actress or whatever, or musician with the number one album. Even if we haven't done that, it's painful to think about that something that should be so good, like the height of this, whatever you won the Academy Award or whatever, like the height of something that should have been a good thing. In some ways, we can see how the potential it is for pain. Because how do you follow that up? What's your second act? Well, some people are like, well, I'll just go back and win more, Olympic gold medals. Some people say, well, I'll go out and win the most Olympic gold medals that anyone has ever won in this sport before. And they do that. But the problem is, even if you do that, all you're doing is just moving the goalpost. The question is the same. Even if you go out and you win the most Olympic gold medals that anyone, or Olympic medals or whatever, you just keep trying to make it, a more specific feat. Let's say you do that. Oh, I won the most Academy Awards. I won the most Grammys. I won the most Pulitzer Prize. I don't, whatever. Then you still are going to be facing the exact same question at some point, even if you move the goalpost down the road, and that's going to be, now what? Did you peak? Was that it? What's ahead of you when all of these incredible accomplishments are, quote, behind you? Who are you? And a lot of it, I said, I think is probably, and like I said, there's several fantastic films, both classics and current films that address a lot of this. But I think that, just imagine if you define yourself as, Olympic gold medalist, you, or Academy Award winning you, or, you know, whatever prize it is, right? And that's who you are, right? I think the challenge then is you kind of get anchored down with that, because it reminds you and everybody else all the time that, yep, you won the Academy Award, or you won multiple Academy Awards, or you won the sporting event, or you won the Nobel Prize or whatever. But what's next? And there's not a single um, field, because we're humans, right? So I don't care if it's math or physics or writing or business. I don't care what field it was that you won this great thing, right? Or you got this award or acknowledgement. At some point, pretty quickly, people are going to start to say, well, what's now? What are you going to follow that up with? And your argument will be, what are you talking about? I was acknowledged as the, CEO of the year or of the decade. I had the most profitable business, in my field. I accomplished things that no one had ever done. I revolutionized an entire industry, or, I redefined my sport, or I've changed, poetry as we understand it, or I've redefined the field of, mathematics and, okay, I don't care what it is. You're going to get, because we're humans, you're going to get sort of a societal, well, now what? Are you just coasting on those, your old accomplishments? And for somebody who hasn't thought ahead and considered this, it opens you up, I think, to intense pain. And so one thing I would think that we want to consider in this series, in the show, is don't define yourself by the accolades. I mean, you did it, but don't define yourself that way. Now, of course, sometimes in your marketing, if you're, for customers or for business or for your business relationships, you're going to put it in your marketing because you need to and you have to. But in your own head, don't define yourself that way. Because it's going to shackle you in some ways, I think, to that. And it's going to be this ongoing reminder that something that actually is supposed to be a really good thing is going to turn into, quote, a negative. Because it's going to be that, well, what have you done lately? What have you done now? And sometimes in some things, especially like sports, I said, you just age out of it. You're just not able, at a certain age to participate any longer because, it's a game that people play in a certain age range or at a physical mobility range. Now, there's some things that people can do. They're not physically impacted by age. And so you can do it, whatever. But you're still going to be up against that same thing. When's the last time that you won, one of those accolades? And I think that can do a ton of damage. Again, shackle you to past, and then also prevent you from exploring new things because you're so obsessed with this external measurement. The healthiest way to look at all this is to answer the question. The question is, have you already peaked? The answer, of course, should be no. Of course not. The only way that's going to work, though, is if you define what the peak is. Now, if you let other people define it, then you're going to be in a world of trouble because other people are going to say, well, I remember when you did this or accomplished that or were awarded this. What have you done now? If you let other people define it, then you're going to be in trouble. But we talk about that in so many different programs. That's going to be a source of trouble for us with all kinds of problems. My point is, then don't let other people define it. Maybe you did have that accolade, 25 years ago, but right now you're doing an amazingly engaging and exciting new adventure. So there you go. You have got to wrestle control of your own life away from some sort of mass public perception. And the thing, for a couple of reasons. One, you don't even know what the public thinks of you, actually. All you know is whatever other entities tell you the public thinks, which is kind of useless because the public is just sort of a mass of, it's an undefined mass. And public perception, of course, is exactly that. I mean, it's a perception that someone is defining, so you don't even know if they're credible, and it changes. Right? How often do we hear about a comeback? Oh, so and so, we hadn't heard from them, and everyone thought it was over, and look at what they're doing in a whole new field. And that's what you'll hear. You'll hear somebody was an athlete, now they're doing business. You'll hear somebody was, a physicist, and now they're doing, some sort of other environmental issue. I mean, it really doesn't matter. But the point is, and we've talked about this in other programs, right? How you're gonna define yourself. And in a lot of this series, in fact, we talk about setting new goals and not being complacent in our satisfaction saturation series. What I'm saying here is that you cannot look in the rearview mirror at all, really. I mean, you're aware about things that have happened, you remember them, but if you get hooked on that in the past, then you're going to stay there. And then instead of you going out and sort of, it's a cliche, right? But spreading your wings and trying new things, you're not going to be able to do that because you're going to keep thinking, well, I have to beat that, right? I have to best what I've done before. I have to do more of that or something bigger or better than that. And if I can't do that, then now I'm a failure. And when I said one of the things about this show and this series that are so emotional for me is, from the outside, for the majority of us that never, ever, ever have and never will accomplish sort of the pinnacle, right? The best athlete in the world, the best chess player in the world. All we think from the outside looking in, how awesome that would be, right? How awesome. And it's just so painful to think that something that was actually set up. I mean, I'm not, it's a huge debate. Is it fair to rank, artists or writers or theoretical physicists or, um, I mean, that's a whole other question. But the point is, it does exist. And one of the reasons, of course, it exists is because A, is trying to, I think, encourage people to explore, excellence. And on other hands, of course, it's a shorthand for people who aren't in that field, who don't really know much about it. They, I'm not an expert, but I watched the Olympics and I saw the people who, won the medal in one of the skiing events. And I don't know anything about skiing, but I can watch that and have some understanding and see, okay, they're the best, or at least at that moment on that day they were. Okay, fine. So it's a shorthand way for other people to have some understanding of the diversity of the world. But it was meant to be a good thing. It wasn't meant to be a bad thing. And to have it so fraught with these examples of how it destroys people, because it anchors them and it just pulls them down at the bottom of that emotional ocean and they just drown down there. I remember when it's more common. Just think about this. And it wasn't my experience either, but in school, especially in the States and a lot of other countries that have similar cultures, there's so much socializing. In the States, there's a lot of social and extracurricular activity, they call it. So, sporting events and music and all kinds of things, right? Which in many ways, I think are all children should, I think, have exposure to these things. I'm not really sure about the exact amount of time that's devoted and what the optimal situation would be. I'm not going to say that it should be more important for a 13-year-old to have some sort of sporting team than to learn some basic educational activities. But I think all children should have exposure to all types of things, right? Sports and art and poetry and all kind of things to have a well-rounded childhood. So you'll have people you'll talk to, and especially in like I said, in parts of the world where it's part of the cultural expectation, and they'll basically say something like, you know what, in high school, I was it. I was the most popular person. I was, and they literally will have competitions. It sounds weird if you're not from one of these cultures, but it's not. I'm not making this up. They will actually have a competition, which is sanctioned in public and everything by the school, where people will vote on who's most popular. And then we'll have competition votes on who is sort of the most popular man and the most popular woman. Well, they're male and female. They're not men and women, but they're, male, female adolescents. And they'll have the homecoming king and homecoming queen. And there's all these really elaborate ways of identifying who's sort of the top of the 14-year-old or 16-year-old peer group in that school. It sounds, again, externally kind of weird, but it is what it is. Other cultures have their own versions of these, right? So my point is, there are people who they peaked at, 16, they peaked. And you'll talk to them and they're 35, and it's like they're just stuck in that. Oh, I remember when I was, head cheerleader and homecoming queen. It was everything. And you're thinking, yeah, but you were a little kid, and now you're 35 years old. But they really are emotionally, for them, that was it. That was the best of their life. And again, emotionally, it certainly wasn't me. I was never voted anything best of anything. Actually, I'm sitting here thinking, no. But the point is, I saw these events, and again, it should be a good thing. Like, it should be a really good thing to look back and think, oh, wow, at that moment in that world, I was the best of that thing. The people said I was, or I was awarded the top award, or I was literally told I'm the most popular, or the most likely to succeed, or whatever it is. And it should be a good thing. And again, for me, it's emotional that these things that are meant to be a positive become a negative only because of how we use that. That it should be just a tool. It should be a tool for sort of measuring at that moment, at that day, in that time, in that place, whatever. I just happen to be the one who came out as, with this accolade. And in a way, I think it should be a positive. When you look back and think, you know what? Maybe whether or not you believe it was fairly done, whether or not you believe it should be done, you should be able to say, hey, irrespective of any of it, it was a compliment, But it becomes but I would argue you should be able to do that with anything else. And that may sound like, I'm not diminishing if you won, the top award, the Tony Award or something. What I'm saying, though, is if that becomes who you are in your mind, it's going to shackle you and again pull you down and drown you in that past, and it won't free you up to try or do anything else because you're so obsessed with this perception that you think everybody else has of you. And we've talked about in other shows. We've had a whole show where we discussed, if you wouldn't worry so much about what other people think about you if you realize how little they do, right? And it's true. The other people aren't thinking about you that much. Now, they might have been watching you when you were on the Olympics at that time, but it doesn't mean that they've been sitting around all this time thinking about you ever since the Olympics went off television or the internet. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a healthy thing. What that means is you're not defined by that. That was part of your experience, but that's not who you are today, and that doesn't define who you are for tomorrow. And I think the most positive examples that we have are people who have done something where they were, immensely acknowledged, and then they went forward in their life and continued to have these new endeavors and passion and adventure. And have you peaked? No, not if you are engaged and excited and anticipating tomorrow. Then of course you haven't. Now you might say, well, yeah, I've really put a lot of my interest into roses, and I'm one of the top people in my neighborhood with my rose garden, and I love it. It makes me really happy, but it's nowhere near when I won my my Nobel Prize. And my point is, why isn't it? Does it make you feel happy? Do you have moments of joy with it? Or does it give you an endeavor where you get lost in time because it's so engrossing? Then yeah, it is. It is a success. And this idea that, well, it's not what everyone else expects of me, or, it's not what other people thought I'd do. Honestly, who are other people and who cares? This is you and your life. You should be proud of what you've done. Now, I've seen, and I've actually talked and worked with people in real life who they're so upset about whatever this great accomplishment was that they actually won't even let you talk about it. Again, this is painful because you think it should be a good thing, right? But they're so upset about whatever disappointment or frustration or whatever they have that they don't even want you to mention, the Grammy Award or whatever. And it's weird because it's a good thing. Remember, the people who aren't you aren't you. They don't know all the details. They don't understand how much. Maybe you won the award, but you didn't want, but that you didn't want the award that year. You felt you had better work another year and all this kind of stuff. Nobody cares. They're not in your field. They weren't competing with you for that award. And even if they were, you could listen to what they have to say. But the point is, it's your journey. It's your life. It's what it was. It was supposed to be a recognition of you as an individual. You should be able to be comfortable with it, right? That, yeah, of course you did that thing, or that thing was awarded to you, or that acknowledgement was bestowed on you, or whatever it is, and that's a nice thing. And then move on with life. And it's not a negative, and it's not a bad thing, and you're not frustrated or angry. I've even, now that I think I've talked to and worked with people who the good thing that was this great acknowledgement publicly, they're mad, right? Because it wasn't the way they wanted it, or they were so upset about how it happened, and it just triggers anger with them. And you think, how are you mad about this? Like, it's an Olympic medal. Who cares about the details? It's an Academy Award. Who cares? You won the Tony. Who cares? It was a Pulitzer Prize. Who cares? But they'll get so caught up in all of this, woulda, coulda, shoulda, the regrets, whatever. It just becomes so, again, it's anchoring them. And this challenge, of course, is, it's exaggerated depending on how much the peak, has been publicly acknowledged. So, like I said, it's more common, especially in the U.S. You'll talk to people, and I remember in middle school, they actually, and because high school in many parts of the U.S., they in middle school, which is your grades below that, like 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. So you're really little kids, early, pre-adolescent and early adolescent, whatever, 12, 13, 14. And they have the same type thing in most parts of the country. They have sporting teams, they have cheerleading and social activities. They vote for most popular and all this kind of stuff. So you have somebody who, is like, I remember when I was 12 years old or 11, I was the best athlete at the time and I won the award or whatever. Okay, again, that should be like a good thing. Like, I did accomplish that. And I remember how great it was when I was 11. And then, you should have been able to integrate that experience along with all your other experiences to moving forward as a healthy, current, alive person, and not stuck on what happened when you were 11 or 31 or 71 or whatever, because it already happened. So you're here. You have not peaked if you define peak. If you don't take the control, the definition of what peaking in your life is, then yeah, you're going to be at the mercy of everybody else's expectations. And I want to add this. Yes, it's exaggerated if you've, and I keep mentioning all these really kind of illustrious things, right? Because those are the examples, and that's where it gets most severe. And that's also where it gets really depressing. You and I read in our media or see in our culture where we see someone who really has accomplished these incredible things and then they are self-destructive or they hurt themselves or whatever, and we think, how does that happen, right? Well, this is part of how it happens. It's not all of it, but it's part of it, because they really start to feel like, well, I'll never be able to live that, do that again, and then they start to diminish and hurt themselves because of that, which of course is ridiculous, because you would think, as an outsider, again, you would think, how can you ever be sad? You were governor or whatever of a state, or you were the prime minister. How will you ever be depressed? Are you serious? Like, from the outside, that's what you would think, but it's not like that. And in fact, like I said, it's exaggerated in a lot of ways, because then you do have this extra pressure and sometimes guilt, where people feel guilty and they feel like, but I was prime minister. Well, yeah, that should be a good thing. Like, how are you sad? But again, we want to acknowledge that when you have these very publicly disseminated and well-known quote unquote accomplishments or recognitions, in some ways it does make it worse, because everybody saw it. It wasn't just like only people in that middle school saw that you were that successful, but kind of a larger population does. And then they have all those expectations. What are you doing now? And you'd be like, well, I've been really doing some exciting things, with my family. Oh, that's it? Real. I mean, it's just. But every time we have that negativity come our direction, it's not about us. It's never about us. It's about the person who's giving you the information. It's about them. So if they're unhappy, if they wish they'd been prime minister, if they don't understand why they didn't qualify for the Olympics or whatever, then they are going to be really mean and nasty. But that's not about you. It's about them. We did a program where we talked about the most powerful thing you can do for anything that you perceive to be an enemy. Now, enemies, things like ignorance, stereotypes. But sometimes people might think a person is their enemy. The best thing you can do in terms of dealing with enemies is to treat yourself well. So if you're having really great days overall, not every day, if you're enjoying what you're doing, if you're good about yourself, you're waking up with anticipation and eagerness, you're passionate and involved, then you are winning, quote unquote. I hate these terms, but I think that they are, they're illustrative, and I think they can help. And you will incur jealousy and envy in people who are unhappy when they see that you're happy. So it's a shortcut for people then to say, well, you think you're happy now with your family, or you think you're happy now with your roses, but what about the fact that you haven't done anything since you won the fill in the blank award? See, it's a way for them to kind of make you unhappy, or to diminish or take away your joy. And you have to make a commitment before you even surpass your goal, while you're in the process of climbing to surpassing your goal, that you're not going to play that game. You're not even going to play. You're not going to play the game about one-upmanship with misery. You're not going to play the game of going around spreading misery and pain. You're not going to do it. You're going to decide you. You're going to decide what are you peaking? You're going to decide your interests. You're going to decide the way to deploy your energies, and you're going to decide. You get people who get trapped into this situation where they just don't want to let go of that sort of former glory, right? And so they do stuff they don't even like. They're miserable. It's like, well, why are you coming out here to do this revival of this play? Not because you want to, because you feel like, well, you have to, because everybody else told you should. Well, forget everybody else. It's your life. If you don't want to do that any longer, or you're tired of it, or you don't enjoy it like you did before, then don't do it. Go do something else. On the other hand, if it makes you delightedly happy, and I went to this was I didn't even know the person. I was a friend of a friend, and invited me to this wonderful service. The person had passed away, and the person had devoted their whole life to being a musician. And they'd been a professional musician, and they'd also taught music at a university. And so after they passed away, some family and friends and peers put on a music concert of some works that they'd composed, and some of and it was wonderful. I mean, the music was fantastic, of course. It's amazing. And so I was sitting there, and I'm thinking, and many of the person lived a long life, so many of the people who were playing, were, I don't know, whatever. I'm just throwing a number out, I don't know, but maybe we're 80 years old. But they still loved it. They're playing their instrument, and they're having fun, and it was great. Now, if that person sat there and just got stuck and said, well, I don't play like I did before when I, was the best, trumpet player in the world or whatever, then they wouldn't be able to have fun. But in the audience, and I didn't know any of the people individually before. I mean, I'd heard of many of them are very well known, and so of course I knew their careers. But if it made them happy to play trumpet and they were able to still play trumpet, play trumpet. Now, if you sit around and play trumpet with people who are sitting around, well, I remember when you played trumpet before, and you won the Grammy, and you were well world renowned, and you played with the symphony and all this kind of stuff. Then those are the wrong people to hang out with, because all they're trying to do is hurt you and make you sad. And if there's something that brings that joy and you can do it, then do it. But don't do it under pressure, feeling like, oh, I have to live up to what I once was. Here's the deal. You never were that thing anyway. That was just a perception, and in that moment, you may have been the most qualified. You may have run the race the fastest. So you earned it. Or at least for people who get mad about this, or at least you were the one who the group decided should have received the accolade. And just, I think, accept it as a positive intended thing, and then integrate it into everything else that's happened in your life as a positive and negative. You've had a whole range of experiences. That's just one experience. It didn't define you. It's part of your journey. But the journey still goes on because you're listening to the show, so you're alive. So, ergo, we got to keep making the next path. What other people's perception is just that. They don't even, we said earlier, other people have not a clue what goes into all this stuff. Not at all. They might, many of the times they've heard of the award or the accolade or whatever. They don't know all the time and effort and sacrifice and stuff it takes to even begin to compete or be part of that community. They don't have a clue. And you know what? They don't need to. They're not a writer. They're not a professional tennis player. They're not an athlete, professionally. So they don't need to know. And you don't need to sit there and lecture them on it. If they're aware of it, fine. It's a nice thing. If they're not aware of it, then fine too. Remember, other people don't think about us that much. I don't care who you were or what you did. I don't care the heights you ascended to, thinking you were it. You were, the biggest, most powerful or important or beautiful or famous or successful or whatever. If you were that temporarily, because that's the nature of life. And you must live today because you're alive right now. So what are we doing right now? Why can't this be the peak? Well, it can. Those who really care about you, I call them the community of care, and we talk about them in different shows. Those are the people in your life that the test is that, your happiness is their happiness. So many times they're friends, family, spouses, sometimes they're coworkers. It really doesn't matter what the title is, but they're people who honestly do care about you. And if you're happy, they're happy. If you're unhappy, they're unhappy. Those people, if you go ask them, hey, when do you think Susie peaked? I think she's peaking right now. She's the happiest I've known her. Because they care and they know you and they understand exactly what you struggle with, what you've succeeded with, and who you are. I talked to somebody a while ago, it was a couple of years ago, and it was about somebody who had some really amazing accomplishments or whatever. And I was talking to a friend who'd known them for like 50 years or something, a really long time, right? And they said something along the lines of, I've known this person all these decades, and I've never known them to really be happy. I've never known them to truly be happy. And it was one of the saddest things I'd ever heard. I thought, well, externally, they'd won all these awards and had all these accolades and everything. But the person who'd been this long time person in their community of caring said they've never really been happy. And that, almost broke my heart. So what was the point of all of it then? We've done programs on this. That you have value just as you are exactly right now. And if you had accomplishments or things that other people consider to be accomplishments and they never made you happy, then that's a huge motivator. We did a whole program on that, right? If you aren't happy, you're not successful, was what we talked about in that show, right? And I mean it. So you're going to peak multiple times. There should be a couple of things when you look in your life and you think, what was sort of my greatest moments of joy? They may be individual things. They're usually not related to work stuff. They're usually, when your sister, graduated from her degree program, it made you so proud because it was such a great moment for her. When your grandmother, had a wonderful party that meant the world to her, and it was one of the happiest times you ever seen her. When if your child accomplished something, or your partner or spouse, or the day you fell in love, or you know what I mean? It's stuff like that. And then within all of that, if you have a positive memory or recollection of some other thing that was work related, or you say, I really enjoyed writing that book, or it meant a lot to me as I was doing that research, I really was excited, then great, then it goes along with it. But it's how you feel. It's constantly, we talk about that in that Joyful Art of Business series, and that whole concept that how you feel matters. So when we talk about, have you peaked? Have you already peaked? Only if you decide you have. And I don't know why anybody who's alive would decide that they've already peaked. That to me would be ridiculous. Because you're going to get really bad outcomes. And it's going to be arbitrary anyway. No matter whatever you say, it's still going to be arbitrary. And I don't understand why, if you're still alive, you don't just set a new goal. You're still thinking. You're still breathing. Can you be of service to others? Can you be of service to yourself? Is there something that gives you a little bit of glee that you can engage in? Come on. Don't diminish yourself and diminish the power of life in general by like, again, committing to some sort of path of self-sabotage, where you say, oh, I've already peaked, the best days of my life are over, this is downhill. Well, okay, if you decide, then it is. But I can't stop anyone from doing anything, nor can I make anyone do anything, right? But we're discussing it in the show, and I hope that it's a platform and an opportunity for you, maybe even a catalyst, to decide, what, I'm going to decide what peaking is. And until I'm unable, to breathe or to be conscious and contribute, why not go ahead every day and give it everything you have? You never know. One of the sweetest, I love these stories and the statistics about people who, sort of the seniors, so people who are, over 90 years old or something, and that in many parts of the world, the marriage rates are going up. And you would think, well, why are people getting married, at 92 years old or 103 or whatever? Why not? And the thing that excites me about that is not just, well, maybe that's when my time will come, right? That someone would find me to be their person to marry. That's part of it, but more than just my own silliness of my own selfish life, is because it tells you that person is still anticipating. And I find it to be such a lesson for us that no, I haven't peaked. You might be 104 and meet somebody who changes your whole life and embark on something that's the most exciting emotional adventure you've ever been on. I don't know. And you don't know either. And this thing where at some point you just decide to turn off, like an automobile, turning off, and you just, that's it, you're finished. Whatever was going to happen that was good already happened, and now you're just going to, I guess, just sit there silent, waiting to end. I just find it to be, I find it to be actually offensive. You're here and there are other people that aren't, and you have a chance at all types of things. And for you to independently decide you're going to disengage, I'm offended by it. I am offended. And you don't know anything. And so you have got to understand that the next adventure, it can come on any from anywhere. You don't know, but you got to be open to it. And be willing to get in life and enjoy it. And yeah, you did stuff there and it was great, and you did something there and it was horrible, but okay, that's the totality of your experience. Keep moving. And if you can't move, then your mind's moving. If you can't physically move, your mind's moving. I mean, come on. Again, it's offensive I peaked. It's offensive. I'm offended by it. And you should be offended too, because I know there are people that you've either known of or read about in your life that you think, well, they shouldn't have left us, as we know us in our physical body. I wish they were still alive. Yeah, and here you are wasting today with this silliness about you've already peaked. Silliness. It's disrespectful. It really is. So stop it. And I hate to be so strident with that, but it really is how I feel. We're here. So, well, hey, yeah, it really is anybody's game. I mean, my sports metaphors, I know they're horrible, right? But it really is. You don't know what you don't know. So re-engage, and let's open up the anticipation, and start seeing what wonderful peaks are to come, and to be open to that, because I personally believe it's a privilege for us to be alive and have these opportunities. So don't squander them. All right. I appreciate you being here today. As always, I do encourage you. Go to CourtneyAnderson.com, take part in our show page, our blog, all the different things that we're adding to the site. We're going to be updating information for future webinars and conferences, of course, coaching services. Support our sponsors that you see there, and leave any ratings or reviews that you see for us on any show distribution outlet like iTunes, and share the show on your social media. Share it out there, and spread the word what we're doing in this community. So again, thank you for being here, and I really mean this honestly. Please, people do, so it always makes me happy. But send me notes and let me know what new things are out there on your horizon for potentially your future peaks in life, and share them. Thank you.